Boston, headed to Los Angeles. Carol Bouchard, an emergency room secretary. She was on her way to Las Vegas with her friend Renee Newell. Renee worked for the airline and gave Carol a buddy pass so the two could vacation together. Tara Creamer was on a business trip to Los Angeles and worried about leaving her two children, Colin, 4, and Nora, 1. Her husband, John, called her a kind and loving wife and mother. 71-year-old Thelma Cusinella was on her way to visit older sister Grace and her brother-in-law in Los Angeles. Thelma did not get to see her sister often and was overjoyed when her daughter found her a discount cross-country fare. Nellie Casey was on her first business trip. Since coming back from a 6-month maternity leave, she would have celebrated her 5th wedding anniversary with husband Michael on September 21st. Linda George, 27, was on a buying trip for an apparel company. She and her fiancé were planning their wedding. It was scheduled for next month. American Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11th, 2001.
You know, we've heard so many stories from our reporters and our bookers out in the field, and I thought I'd share one with you now that'll give you an even better idea of how people are responding to this crisis here. Stephanie Ginkin went into the field, and she caught up with a rabbi who was presiding over a grief counseling service at the Piera Hotel. And in particular, counseling the relatives of the victims of Cantor Fitzgerald, a bond firm, which was literally wiped out by this tragedy. And he said the scene there was dramatic. They obviously would not allow cameras in there. And he said that there was one story in particular that hit him. A woman stood up in the memorial and said, "I lost my husband. I have nothing. I don't even know how I will be able to pay the rent." And the rabbi said he and others vowed to put a collection box in every single grocery store in New York City and ask for any kind of help they could get for her, a nickel, a quarter, a dollar, to help this woman pay her rent. He said he was looking into other ways to raise funds for her as well. So just another reminder, Miles, of what folks are doing here to help those whose lives have been forever changed and destroyed in many ways by what this happened. Miles, I thought you might be interested in one little point that we just got from the city, from the Office of Emergency Management, which is actually saying they are getting so much response from New Yorkers that they're saying we can't handle anymore. The system is working. We appreciate your help. But because of the logistics downtown and how confined the staging areas are, they're actually telling people stay at home.
And the blood banks are full, we're told, as well. It's good to hear all of that. Let's check the latest developments as we continue our coverage on the attacks on America. Crews working at the site of the World Trade Center in New York did not find any survivors under the tons of debris overnight. There are 185 confirmed deaths now, but more than 4,700 people on the confirmed list of missing. The first arrest has been made in connection with Tuesday's terror attack investigation. The Justice Department telling us the individual in question is a material witness in the investigation and is one of the people who you'll recall was detained at JFK International Airport on Thursday, prompting the shutdown of that airport. In addition, in Europe on Thursday, 2 men were charged, or actually they were charged yesterday in Brussels for allegedly planning an attack on American interests in Europe. So the Justice Department has been telling us there are concerns of additional attacks, and there are further arrests and further investigations. In addition, the Justice Department has about 100 people there watching right now in the wake of these attacks. At the U.S. Capitol, Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use force against those responsible for the attacks on America. Federal authorities say the cockpit voice recorder has been recovered from that jet that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. You recall the flight data recorder, which handles the situation of where the aircraft was already recovered. That cockpit voice recorder is being sent to Washington for analysis. It captures the last 30 minutes of conversation inside the cockpit, assuming it was operating. And finally, Logan International Airport has reopened 4 days after terrorists hijacked 2 of the planes at the airport. We've been going through the grim details of those 4 harrowing flights since this attack occurred on Tuesday. Some of the details are tough to handle. Some of them are, quite frankly, were mystifying to us. And we've put them all together in a piece for you which takes us inside the 4 flights involved in this attack. It is Tuesday morning over America, and the skies are crowded as ever. More than 4,500 flights are in the air. A typical day, or so this FAA radar replay implies. The seats filled with salesmen on their way to a big presentation, students headed home, families to Disney. But somewhere in this dizzying, disorienting field of blue, 19 passengers sat in their seats on 4 separate flights, reviewing a sinister, synchronized plan that would change aviation, change America forever. No, it was not a typical morning, and there was at least one subtle clue. 2 Arab friends who insisted on sitting far apart on a nearly empty plane. Odd, thought an airline employee. Odd indeed. Boston's Logan Airport, Terminal B, Gate 26. American Airlines captain John Ogonowski gave the signal to push back his Boeing 767. Flight 11 was bound for Los Angeles. This father of 3 and part-time farmer had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. Gate 19, the next terminal, 22-year-old Lisa Frost and 64 others boarded another LA-bound 767. United Airlines Flight 175. Lisa was headed home to celebrate her recent college graduation, number 1 in her class. American 11 taxied ahead of United 175 to the active runway. They were both airborne by 8:15. No one knew that among the seated passengers there were hijackers, 5 men on each flight, ready to take control of the planes. Here's how it all unfolded, according to this computer replay of the FAA radar information. American Flight 11 took off out of Boston and flew due west across Massachusetts and into upstate New York. United 175 flew southwesterly across Connecticut. About 20 minutes into both flights, things changed drastically. American 11 turned due south very sharply. United 175 also went off course toward New York. At about the same time, the transponders on both aircraft were turned off. That's a crucial device which sends important information and adds it on to the radar blip which controllers see. Things like the type of aircraft and, most importantly, the altitude. When flight controllers in FAA radar rooms in New Hampshire and New York saw this, they immediately surmised it was a hijacking. They also assumed it would end like other hijackings, at an airport. So they concentrated on keeping other planes away from the wayward flights. They tried repeatedly to contact the crew on the radio, to no avail. Just as Flight 11 took its ominous turn, another American Airlines plane, a 757, departs out of Washington's Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles. CNN has learned that as the passengers began to board, an American Airlines employee struck up a conversation with 2 Arab male passengers who said they were friends. One of them had a first-class boarding pass for seat number 2B, the other in coach. The American Airlines employee asked, "Why don't you guys sit together?" She felt that was odd. It was. Those 2 men had been named by the FBI as 2 of the 5 hijackers, including Nani Hajur, who is believed to have been trained as a pilot. Also on the flight, a group of school children on a field trip, a husband and wife flight attendant team, and noted attorney Barbara Olson. Nothing seemed amiss until 4 hijackers armed with knives took control of the aircraft.
It's a frangible piece of material. It is not designed to keep people out that are determined, much less a group of individuals. So a group of determined individuals are going to be able to assault the cockpit and gain entry with the current door.
8:29 a.m., American Flight 11 remains in serious trouble and has a new course, the Twin Towers in New York City. But Captain Ogonowski tries to signal air controllers of his plane's fate by keeping a microphone open for those on the ground to hear. The hijackers have stabbed several flight attendants, but not before one of them can phone American's headquarters back in Dallas. The plane drops to below 1,000 feet, speeding closer to its target. 3 flights, 14 hijackers, and the drama in the sky still isn't over. There is a 4th flight, United Airlines Flight 93, a 757 which took off from Newark, New Jersey at 8:44 in the morning bound for San Francisco with 35 passengers and crew, among them 4 hijackers. As it becomes airborne, American Airlines Flight 11, the first flight out of Boston, is only a minute away from striking the first tower of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, United 175 is not far behind. It flies to the south and then over New York Harbor, taking aim at the South Tower. It was 8:45, only 20 minutes after controllers realized it was hijacked. American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into the northern tower of the World Trade Center.
You have to remember, these guys were not trying to land these things in a crosswind, on a short runway, in inclement weather. They were going after big targets.
On United Flight 175, passengers begin to make phone calls to their loved ones. Shortly before 9 a.m., 12 minutes after American Flight 11 has impacted, United 175 is set for a collision course with the southern tower of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, according to one family member, on United 93, the hijackers, who had bought first-class tickets, reportedly told the passengers they were going to die and to call their loved ones to say goodbye. 31-year-old Jeremy Glick called his wife. Staying on the line as long as he could, Glick told his wife a flight attendant had been stabbed and that the 4 hijackers had moved them to the back of the plane. Tom Burnett also called his wife. The 38-year-old executive told her the male passengers had taken a vote and were not going to give up, despite the bloodshed on board by their attackers.
Said they've already knifed a guy. They're saying they have a bomb. Please call the authorities.
When Glick's family confirmed what another passenger had heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the terrorists. At 9:03 a.m., 48 minutes after takeoff, United Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. "22 minutes later, at 9:25 a.m., there is violence on American Airlines Flight 77. Passenger Barbara Olson calls her husband, Solicitor General Ted Olson, from the back of the plane. While huddled with the other passengers, she told her husband the 5 hijackers had knives and box cutters and had taken the pilot out of the cockpit. Once again, the transponder was turned off, so the radar information is somewhat misleading. But controllers believe that the plane didn't stray far from the Washington airspace, flying around the area and flirting with the restricted airspace near the Capitol and the White House. About 40 minutes after the last collision at the World Trade Center, American Flight 77 was headed directly toward the Pentagon. Meanwhile, United Flight 93 was still on course toward San Francisco, and right as it got toward Cleveland, it made a sudden course change, a 180. Its transponder went off at about the same time, and this flight was headed directly toward Washington. At 9:45, American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. 3 downed planes, and as United 93 headed east, air traffic controllers watching the flight reported they could hear screaming over the cockpit radio. One voice yelling repeatedly, "Get out of here." And then later, an accented voice apparently making a public address announcement to the passengers, telling them, "There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." By 10:10 a.m., it was all over. An hour and 15 minutes after United Flight 93 departed Newark Airport, shortly after the men had voted to attack the terrorists, the 757 crashed in a remote cornfield in rural Pennsylvania. When it became clear these were not conventional hijackings with tense but safe landings and instead suicide missions, the FAA took some unprecedented action. It grounded all flights on the ground that had not departed and ordered flights in the air to land immediately. It's an amazing sight to watch the radar replay of all this as the 4,500 dots disappear. In little more than an hour, nothing was flying over the U.S. The skies silent, a nation stunned. The air traffic control system still not back up to full speed. The FAA taking its time and fits and starts getting things open. Still some airports closed, of course, and we are watching that. Just one more point about United Airlines Flight 93. We know a little bit more about the alleged hijackers on board. Ziad Jarrah, who hails from Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, according to his family and according to investigative sources, spend some time in Afghanistan.